Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever looked at a landscape and wondered if there's more to it than, just rolling hills and winding rivers? What if there were hidden shapes, these massive ancient patterns woven into the very ground beneath your feet? That's where we're headed in this deep dive.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is the idea that certain places aren't just geographic locations. They might be vast terrestrial zodiacs, like literal astrological maps laid out in the land itself, echoing, celestial patterns. It's quite a concept.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into a whole stack of sources. We've got research papers, historical accounts, and even an interview excerpt from someone living right on one of these sites. We want to explore what these believed land-based zodiacs in Britain might actually represent.
Right. Our mission isn't just to list facts. We want to extract the most important sort of nuggets of knowledge and insight here, helping you understand not just what is being claimed, but why these ideas have captivated people for, well, centuries, really. It layers geography, history, mythology, even the human psyche. And we'll focus on two key examples the sources really highlight: the Glastonbury Zodiac and the Kingston Zodiac.
It's a journey into a truly alternative view of the British landscape, isn't it? So let's get started.
Okay, so the core idea that emerges from these sources is, well, it's quite something. It's the belief that areas of land in Britain, through this combination of natural features and ancient human alteration, form the shapes of the zodiac signs, but on a colossal scale.
That's right. We're talking about patterns much, much bigger than something like, say, a stone circle. One source describes the Glastonbury Zodiac as like a great circle covering a huge area of the west of England.
hmm And while the sources do mention other purported zodiacs, like ones in Northampton and Carmarthenshire, they really seem to home in on Glastonbury and Kingston, probably because they're seen as having the most compelling physical boundaries and, well, evidence, relatively speaking.
And the story of how these patterns were sort of brought back into modern awareness is just as intriguing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Katherine Maltwood is widely credited with the rediscovery of the Glastonbury Zodiac back in the early 20th century.
She is, yes. But then you have the experience of Mary Caine, who actually lives on the Kingston Zodiac. She shared her journey in one of the sources we looked at. Apparently, she first heard about the Glastonbury Zodiac decades ago from an old Druid named Ross Nieholes.
A Druid, wow.
Yeah, and he warned her, quite ominously actually, that people went mad researching it. But, she was undeniably intrigued.
I can imagine, despite the warning.
Right. She bought Maltwood's books and just dove in. And she found the evidence Maltwood presented, the place names, the legends, the philosophy, incredibly compelling. She even says it made sense of fundamental Christian ideas for her, like seeing the virgin birth as a metaphor for the virgin earth giving birth, or crucifixion as a star pattern.
So the zodiac framework clicked with Christian dogma for her.
Yeah, she says all the dogma suddenly clicked in the light of the zodiac, which she admits is strange, but also felt very powerful to her.
And here's where it gets really interesting, that layer of personal synchronicity you mentioned earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Mary Caine wrote to Maltwood with questions, even some objections, apparently. Then, about 3 months later, she gets a letter notifying her that Maltwood had died 3 months prior.
Wow.
Almost to the day Mary Caine first heard about the Zodiac from that Druid, the timing just felt incredibly significant to her. It led her to feel she was part of some time-space pattern, almost like Maltwood was looking for someone to pick up the thread of her work,
Like passing the baton almost.
Kind of. And this feeling deepened when she then discovered the Kingston Zodiac herself, shortly after Maltwood's death.
Of course, this kind of research, it doesn't come without its challenges. The sources make that pretty clear.
Definitely not. There's even a rumor mentioned that Maltwood's original notes might have been stolen from her museum. We don't know if that's true, but it's mentioned.
Well, and Mary Caine herself talks very openly about the financial strain, having to self-finance her books, which apparently depleted her savings, and having video projects stalled because of lack of funds.
She expresses a hope for a more scholarly, interdisciplinary book eventually, bringing in experts from history, astronomy, psychology, geology.
That would be fascinating. Okay, so if the idea is these patterns exist, where exactly do proponents say we see them in the landscape? It's not just random shapes, right?
No, not at all. They point to specific features in the land itself. And the argument is really about this interplay between natural geology and deliberate human alteration over vast periods of time.
So specific examples.
Right. For the Glastonbury Zodiac, take Dundon Hill. Proponents suggest the natural contours of the ground there seem to dictate the outline for the ramparts of an ancient British hill fort. and that these combined contours form what's perceived as a Christ-like head, which is part of the Gemini figure.
A Christ-like head formed by a hill fort.
That's the interpretation, yes. Though sadly, one source notes this perceived head is now marred by a recent fir plantation, so things change on the ground.
Then there's Wimbletoot.
Ah, yes, Wimbletoot. Described as a splendid great mound, this is seen as the nipple on the breast of the Virgo figure, and significantly, it's described as man-made.
Okay, so that implies deliberate construction fitting the pattern.
Potentially, yes. And another ancient feature, Ponter's ball, is interpreted as forming the horn of the Capricorn figure like a unicorn's horn. However, the sources are good at also mentioning doubts. There's historical uncertainty about Ponter's ball's original purpose. It might have been a breakwater or landing place because of past flooding.
So not every feature is definitively agreed upon, even by proponents.
Exactly. It highlights the interpretive nature of it all.
And moving to the Kingston Zodiac, you mentioned Austerley Hill as its counterpart to Glastonbury Tor.
That's right. Though while Glastonbury Tor is very dramatic, Austerley is described more modestly. A slight bump or hillock, not heavily terraced, but it's notable for having a very ancient rounded settlement on its top, and the name itself is suggestive to researchers.
How so?
Well, potentially related to Easter or Mound of Rebirth, maybe, or possibly from the Old English word ost, meaning knob. Interestingly, Harrow Hill, which is 7 miles north, is considered more like Glastonbury Tor, an ancient holy hill where Harrow is said to mean holy.
And the place names. You mentioned those earlier. The sources argue they're like linguistic breadcrumbs left behind.
They really lean into this, yes. Near the Glastonbury dog figure, for instance, you have Starsland Farm.
Starsland Farm. Okay, that's pretty on the nose.
Right. Here the stars' land begins. It's hard to ignore. Then Athelney is linked to Atheling, a term for a prince or king's son, often one initiated into mysteries. Othery, near the dog's ear, is connected to Otis, the Greek word for ear, and Aller on the dog's back. Its name is spelled similarly to the Sumerian Alu for paradise.
And Aller is where Alfred the Great baptized Guthrum the Dane.
Precisely. Adds another layer of significance.
What about Kingston names?
Similar patterns are suggested there. Names like Ham on Sagittarius, possibly related to Homestead or a sun god. Wick, Witch, or Wick appear on Capricorn's nose near Aquarius and also near Glastonbury Tor. This is linked to Whitmound, a term connected in these sources to inspiration or high, perhaps sacred places.
Interesting.
Perryvale, near the Kingston Capricorn, is seen as a perimeter valley, and proponents note its name sounds like Percival from the Grail legends.
Oh, linking to the myths already.
Exactly. And names like Walton, Wallington, and Wales Farm Road are interpreted as suggesting the Circle of the Waiwelas, or Welsh, perhaps indicating a special sacred area associated with the Welsh people.
So the big question then, do the stars themselves actually align with these massive figures?
Well, the sources generally say yes, the stars do fit on these perceived figures, though they are honest about some slight imperfections. For instance, Virgo stars in Glastonbury or Aries stars in Kingston are noted as being just slightly outside the strict boundary of the land figure, so it's not always a perfect overlay, but generally considered a match.
Okay, so that connection to the physical landscape in names is compelling for proponents, but the sources argue this knowledge runs deep into history, particularly linked to royalty.
Yes, that's a major thread. Katherine Maltwood's theory points to really ancient origins, perhaps Sumerian traders around 2700 BC recognizing and maybe developing the figures, Phoenicians potentially continuing this later.
Sumerians, wow.
It's a big claim. And there's the strong suggestion that knowledge of these zodiacs wasn't just folk belief, but an old British royal secret, supposedly passed down through lines of Celtic and then Saxon kings.
Okay, this is where figures like Alfred the Great come in then.
Exactly. The sources propose he knew about this. Even that famous story of Alfred burning the cakes at Athelney gets interpreted zodiacally within this framework. And his baptism of Guthrum the Dane at Aller, it's seen not just as a political act, but as an initiation into a better set of laws, happening at a place specifically significant within the dog figure of the Glastonbury Zodiac.
So the location was key.
That's the argument. And his Welsh biographer bishop, Asser, is also brought into this picture. Asser lived near and apparently laid claim to the Gemini figure area in Glastonbury, founding a bishop's palace and a church there.
And being Welsh.
Precisely. He's seen as potentially having access to the ancient Druidic tradition and knowing this royal secret. Interestingly, both Asser and St. Dunstan are said to have been present in Kingston as well, linking the two sites again.
St. Dunstan, around 1000 AD. What's his connection?
Well, he's another key figure linked to this knowledge, born on Sagittarius, apparently, in Boltonsborough, baptized in the River Brue, which is associated with the turtle dove symbol in the Glastonbury Zodiac. And he crowned kings at Kingston. Plus, he's described as loving old pagan songs and playing the harp.
Which proponents see as a hint towards older, perhaps Druidic traditions.
Exactly. It's all pieced together like clues.
And the Plantagenets are also mentioned, Edward III.
Yes, particularly Edward III. A great Arthurian figure, built the Round Table Tower at Windsor. He's believed to have known about the Kingston Aquarius figure, maybe linked to the falcon or eagle symbol. The sources even mention the Plantagenets being suspected of a kind of deviant Christianity, perhaps influenced by stargazing Saracens they encountered during the Crusades.
So the idea is, despite potential suppression of Celtic traditions by the Roman Church, this knowledge was largely preserved through royalty.
That seems to be the suggestion. Maybe breaks in transmission happened, but the core knowledge persisted, passed down through these royal lines.
This historical thread even touches on some fascinating ancient texts, right?
Oh, absolutely. One source references a text copied by John of Glastonbury around 1400 AD. It's about Joseph of Arimathea in Avalon, which is Glastonbury.
And what does it say?
It describes Avalon as being adorned by foretelling spheres of prophecy. These are believed to be the 13 signs, the 12 zodiac signs, plus the dog figure. It also states Joseph is buried near an oratory above a mighty virgin, interpreted as the Virgo land figure.
The Virgo figure again.
Yes. And intriguingly, it mentions Joseph brought 2 vessels containing blood and sweat, not the familiar chalice or grail.
That's a significant difference from later Grail legends.
It is. And this text is seen as potentially much older than those 14th century legends. Possible Alexandrian, Saracen, Egyptian, or Coptic origins are suggested, implying a much earlier, perhaps non-Christian root for the Joseph legend, one that's explicitly tied to these believed zodiacal patterns in the landscape itself.
So you have this potential line of secret knowledge through royalty, ancient texts. But how did that ancient belief system, manifest? The sources suggest it was deeply woven into Britain's most famous myths and esoteric traditions.
Absolutely. The Arthurian legends are central here. They saw a resurgence encouraged by figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine, who had connections to the troubadours in Grail stories. And the legendary land of Lyonesse is often identified with these Arthurian lands, including Glastonbury and Cornwall.
And the Grail quest itself gets reinterpreted.
Completely. It's seen not just as a physical search for an object, but as an allegory for achieving initiation into this deeper knowledge, like a pilgrimage of trial and error, journeying around the zodiac figures, symbolized perhaps by the character Percival, becoming a master, connecting with the higher self, that's seen as achieving the Grail, represented by Galahad, the perfected man. Bors is also mentioned, possibly as an Arthur figure or son linked to this journey.
So the landscape is the quest map, in a way.
That's the idea. And other myths get layered onto the figures, too. The Nemean lion, representing Leo, is linked to Hercules' trial, symbolizing struggles with the outer world, its attractions, its distractions.
Okay.
And figures like Gwynep and Arthur are associated with hunt figures, representing the wind, maybe, hunting dying souls to Anne, the Welsh otherworld, or Hades. St. Colin's mythical encounter with Gwynep on Glastonbury Tor fits right into this context, and her and the hunter is mentioned as potentially the same figure.
It's like a mythological overlay on the geography.
Exactly. And on the Kingston Zodiac, the Robin Hood mythology is seen as overlaid in a similar way. Robin as Sagittarius, the archer, the merry men as the other signs, Maid Marian as Virgo, Friar Tuck, or maybe Merlin, as Capricorn.
It's a fascinating way to see these classic stories potentially mapped onto the land itself.
It really is. And the Druids, of course, are seen as central figures in preserving and teaching this.
How are they described in the sources?
As a kind of secret society, really, with initiation rites, like a gatehouse ceremony mentioned. They're said to teach an alternative history not found in standard textbooks. They're noted for valuing knowledge, which is contrasted with the Saxons, and some apparently call themselves swine, maybe as a form of humility or even disguise.
Interesting. And they were believed to control weather.
Yes, like Saint Swithin, who's associated with Druidic power over weather in some traditions. Mary Caine actually shares some personal anecdotes about attempting to influence weather at Glastonbury Festival and Stonehenge, drawing on these older beliefs.
Trying to make it rain or stop raining.
Both, I think, kind of experimenting with these old ideas.
Now, there's also a discussion, particularly from Mary Caine, about the modern landscape and this knowledge potentially being taken over by groups she calls anti-Christian pagan groups.
Yes, she expresses some anxiety about that. However, she also makes the point that the core teaching of the zodiac, as interpreted through these sources, is actually quite similar to original Christianity, including elements she believes Christianity later dropped, like reincarnation and a holistic cosmology summed up by that famous phrase, as above, so below.
So, beyond the history and myth, there are these profound psychological and philosophical interpretations woven in.
Absolutely. Astrology's psychology is seen as a tool, a way to help people understand themselves better. The zodiac patterns aren't just maps of the land or stars. They're considered a kind of foundation of knowledge for all religions, telling us who we are, what we come from, that we are fundamentally part sun, part space, part earth, a connection perhaps symbolized by the Virgo figure, the Earth Mother. And the whole purpose, seen through that lens of the Grail quest again, is ultimately about increasing consciousness.
Achieving the Grail.
Is linked to the May symbol, too. Finding balance between, say, academic study and mystical experience. Applying experience to intuition to reach the center, which is often seen metaphorically as reaching the top of the hill. Like climbing Glastonbury Tor itself, which is seen as a way to gain inspiration.
And the idea that the aura of a place actually affects the people living within these effigies.
Yes, that's mentioned too. That living within the bounds of, say, the Leo figure might subtly influence you or resonate with certain aspects of your psyche.
Of course, delving into all this, it hasn't been smooth sailing. The sources don't shy away from the resistance people faced.
Not at all. Historically, researching it apparently made people think you would go mad, according to that Druid's warning to Mary Caine.
A pretty strong deterrent.
You'd think so. And Mary Caine herself describes facing what she perceives as outright opposition. She calls them dark forces or little demons, seemingly determined to delay or obstruct the spread of this knowledge.
Wow. Does she give examples?
She does, yeah, quite striking ones. Feeling physically ill due to what she believes was a psychic attack, printing machines breaking down at crucial moments, and even a publisher she was working with going bust, which she attributes with this sort of wry certainty to the idea that the zodiac bust them. Like the knowledge itself carried this disruptive power.
That's intense, suggesting forces actively working against it.
That's her experience, yes. And she also mentions facing more mundane human factors too, like ego tripping or condescending behavior from some individuals within the field. The usual difficulties perhaps amplified.
So, given all this complexity, the historical weight, the myths, the personal challenges, why does this incredibly layered, sometimes challenging body of knowledge matter today? What do the sources suggest?
Well, they suggest that in our current time, which is often marked by declining traditional religion and a lot of uncertainty about identity and purpose, these zodiac patterns offer a potential pathway. They propose it offers a more holistic view of the universe and maybe a renewed sense of meaning. It's seen as providing a kind of restatement of the source of all religions, but maybe in more modern experiential terms, helping to illuminate who we are and what our potential purpose in the world might be.
So, after all that, what does this all mean? We've taken a deep dive into the sources exploring these compelling, sometimes pretty startling, ideas about massive ancient terrestrial zodiacs in Britain. We've seen how landscape features, place names, historical accounts, powerful myths, and even these intensely personal experiences seem to intertwine, suggesting patterns that proponents argue have resonated with people for millennia.
Mm-hmm. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really does raise an important question, one that kind of lingers long after reviewing these sources. Are these vast figures in the land truly deliberate designs from some sophisticated, perhaps forgotten ancient past? That's one possibility. Or are they natural patterns that human consciousness recognized over time and then imbued with profound meaning?
Or maybe something else entirely.
Exactly. Could they be something else, perhaps archetypal shapes emerging from the collective psyche, as some sources sort of hint at, projected onto the canvas of the land?
It's a mystery with just layers upon layers, isn't it? It invites you to look at the world around you and maybe even yourself through a completely different lens. Are these patterns out there, waiting to be found, waiting for us to align with them somehow? Or are they primarily within us, seeking expression and recognition in the physical world? It's fascinating to think about.
It really is, and it feels like knowledge that's deeply relevant somehow.
Yeah.
Speaking to that enduring human need we all have for connection, for meaning, and for a sense of purpose in this vast universe.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some truly intriguing nuggets to ponder and perhaps look at the landscape with fresh eyes next time you're out.